Coming up next on The Joy of Fixing, we build this beautiful outdoor cabinet with a hidden tool tray made out of sawmill poplar and yellow pine. Thanks for watching. Let's go. Ah, what a great day. A great day to clean up the carport. 95% humidity and 95 degrees. Perfect. We've had this house for over 3 years, but we've never cleaned this pile out all the way to the bottom. This is the first time this concrete's seen the light in many years. So, I want to put a cabinet here. We have no storage in the carport, and that means barbecue tools, hand tools, and kids' toys always end up on top of the log piles and in the corners. We need real storage out here. So I'm going to use this spot, and Zod's not going to help, but he wanted to say hi. So I still have this stack of poplar and pine way back in the dungeons of the garage. I need to run it all through the planer, so I'm going to fill up the generator. Still no electrical down here and none in sight. I love working with poplar. I think it has just a beautiful personality. It's got some of the classic personality traits of like walnut, but it's soft and nice to work with. It takes stain really well without pre-treating. I just love working with poplar. I might actually say it's my favorite wood to work with, which I don't know if a lot of people would say that, but I love it. But it's hours and hours of planing. In fact, the first entire day of working on this cabinet was just planing wood down to the right thickness and picking pieces I could use. Now here's a hot little tip for you people buying thickness planers. Lots of folks will tell you to put a piece of melamine like this to run through the cabinet and have a longer in-feed, out-feed table. But the problem with melamine is eventually it mars up and you can see it'll scratch. So I don't like it. If you're going to do something like this, I'd suggest getting a chunk of Formica. Formica will let it skid, and Formica will let it just go through like butter. And it's not going to get penetrated and it's tough as nails. I want to pick through these and see which ones I've left some sawmill chatter in and which ones I haven't. I'll make decisions on what kind of personality I want in the boards for the face frame. Probably stuff with some pretty wild grain lines so it really pops when the stain's applied and the finish is on it. So more planing, tons of planing. Who'd have ever thought we'd start the video with this much planing? But like you can see, some of that sawmill chatter is going to be just what the doctor ordered. Just a little personality left to let you know that this lumber was made from the sawmill. And of course, the first of multiple piles in this project of wood chips. I'm still working on building a wood chip collector, and I'm not anywhere near doing that yet either. So for now, blowing it into a pile and burning as much of it as I can is what's going to happen. But hey, if you're in East Tennessee and need wood chips, give me a call. I really was going to build this cabinet out of some plywood, and then I started thinking, I used to build cabinets for years. Why don't I just build it? So then it came to the side panels. What am I going to do for the side panels? All of these boards are no thicker than 6 inches. And I finally realized I was just going to have to straighten up the edges, and I was going to have to join them all together to make a nice panel on the side. It'll absolutely be worth it for the way it's going to look. It'll be strong as heck. It'll look beautiful, but it is a lot of work. Regardless, I think it's going to be worth it, although it's going to be quite time-consuming as opposed to just building a box like this out of plywood. Regardless, I'm doodling up just a couple of dimensions, trying to figure out what I need for panels. I have no idea what this cabinet's going to look like at this point, and by the end, it doesn't look anything like what I'd planned. It was just kind of an evolution that happened while I built it, using ideas as I went. Half the fun of building things sometimes is just living in the moment, not planning too far forward. I need the hard dimensions, of course. That's really the only restrictions I have. But right now, all I've got in my mind is something that'll act as a little bit of a workbench for little projects in the carport and a bunch of storage. That's going to change as the project goes on, but for now, that's what we're going for, and it's time to start making these side panels. I picked 3 pieces of poplar that I thought had nice personalities, got them all straightened out, and put them side by side. And now I'm marking up places for the joinery. I'm labeling them so I make sure everything goes back together the way I want it to once I've made all the cuts for the biscuits. This is a lot of biscuit jointing, but it's going to be awesome, and I'm excited to use a new biscuit joiner. I've never had a biscuit joiner, actually. I would have maybe done this with pocket screws or something like that, or just glued it up and clamped it and relied on the internal structure to hold it all together, and that would have been fine. But I really wanted to give this some extra love. If I was going to go this far to make side panels, I might as well really make the side panels nice, professional. And so, the biscuit jointing begins. Since I get to do a lot of things I've never done on this project, I'm going to use Gorilla Wood Glue. I've got a hunch that it's going to come out a little gummy and be a little bit of a mess, but I've never used it, and I'm sure it's going to hold nice and tight, so I abandoned some of the other brands I traditionally use just to give this a try. Now, I try to buy American made. I really do. I think it's important. But I'll tell you what, for bar clamps like this, I couldn't pony up the money for ponies, if you know what I mean. And I wasn't going to buy big bar clamps. These were perfect at Harbor Freight, I think. They were pretty darn affordable, and they work great for just putting panels like this together and having a nice big long bar clamp that doesn't have to clamp too hard, but just enough. Now, like you're going to see here, there's a lot of wood glue squeeze out when these clamps start going in. And I'll give you a warning. You want to clean this up as quick as you can. I'd even get some water on it, which I did not. Because by the time this starts saturating the wood, it's going to cause problems downstream when you need to stain. And you'll see a little of that towards the end of the video. Now, I've got just enough width to achieve that depth, and that's going to be good enough for me. Also, I've made sure that they're at least tall enough with a little room to cut off the excess. Basically, I made them oversized, and I'll run them through the table saw and hit the ends with the circular saw in the end. But for now, I just need to clamp them up, let them dry out, clean off the excessive glue before that happens, and that's about all I can do with this for the day because of limited shop space, limited clamps, and it's hot as the devil and there's no electricity down there for fans. So guess what? That's day one. Actually, maybe even day two. So here it is on day 2 or 3, who knows? Getting started in the morning, trying to get started earlier. After all, my body's not what it used to be, and I'm still recovering from surgery and just dealing with some disability and chronic pain that really puts me down and out a lot. There's those Pittsburgh clamps again from Harbor Freight. Really, really liked them. Worked great. Regardless, I can only work a little bit every day, so this project took me the better part of a month. And that's okay. I could have done it probably in a day or two with plywood really easy, but this is going to be something special, something that's going to be around for a while, maybe something that's around after I die someday. So, what's taking a little bit of time every day? Now, I'm marking the ends of these so that I can cut these end panels to the proper height that I would like. You can see there's still all those joining lines that I'll have to sand off later. But you can also see there's a lot of beautiful chatter from the saw blade. And I left just enough in after doing the planing on the wood. Now, I got a problem out here. I don't actually have a workbench. I have a little workbench, but not a workbench that rolls around in the center of the room. So I had to come up with whatever spare plywood I had laying around and chunks of wood just to make a table big enough to build this thing on. And that's okay, because I can also deconstruct it and get it out of the way and still use all of this wood for something later. Someday I'll build a better workbench, but not right now. I'm not planning on doing any big carpentry projects like this again anytime in the very near future. So I'm going to square up the ends of some of these boards and start figuring out what I'm going to do for the face frame. I still have no plan. 1 door, 2 doors, No doors? I don't know. As I start to look at how much wood stock I have to work with at this point, I've decided I'm going to build a 2-opening cabinet. I'm not sure if it's going to be open shelving or doored at this point yet, but I am going to build it the way that I always professionally built cabinet doors in the past. Granted, I've always built cabinets with wood that's been ordered from cabinetry manufacturers with a professional finish and perfectly tight dimensions, just beautiful maple and oak and stuff like that. And I've never done it out of sawmill lumber, and we're going to start today. So I'm going to do it the way that it's always done in cabinetry with a face frame, and that's going to be pocket hole screws. Pocket hole screws make it really easy to get things joined from the back and not have any visible fastening from the front, and also pull all those cracks in nice and tight. I'll put a link to this pocket hole jig in the description of the video below. I really like this setup. It comes with the drill bit, it comes with the nice long square head, it even comes with a few sample fasteners just to let you kind of get an idea of which fasteners you'd like to buy for the types of projects you have. No, I'm not sponsored. I just really liked this setup, and it's better than any other ones I've used before, and the price was great. So anyway, more pocket holing. More pocket holing, more pocket holing, more pocket holing. Yeah, you know, I wanted to put a lot of screws in it and make sure it was tight because it's going to be an outdoor thing. I would just want it tough as nails, and I want things joined well. Now that face frame is built, and there's a couple problems with it that we'll look at coming up here, like that gap, namely. But there's a reason for it. No big deal. Now I'm going to start cleaning up these end panels. Now you can see I'm drilling out all these pocket holes in the end panels, and what I'm going to do is use pocket holes to join basically the side panels, end panels, whatever you want to call them, to the face frame. That ought to be pretty awesome. Nice, solid box. Now I have these little corner clamps, and they worked okay. They're picture frame clamps, and they're cheap. Instead of all these fancy corner clamps that you can still buy online, I like them. I've had them for years, and they work great for stuff like this, just to hold a corner. Now, of course, I'm not forgetting to glue, because as we all know, as surprising as it always is, the glue does as much work, maybe even more work sometimes, than the fasteners. Well, there it is. Face frame, side panels. Pretty exciting. 3 legs in the front. I figured a little support in the front, middle, couldn't hurt it, just so it doesn't totally sag over time. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm actually very happy with that. Considering that I just made this up as I was going right here while I was talking to you. It's pretty nice. I'm very excited. But now I'm at the point where I'm already trying to think of how do I build the inside of this. And I think the first thing that I probably need to do is clean things off a little, because there's sawdust everywhere from pocket holing, of course, or drill shavings, or whatever you want to call it. But I need to address a little bit of this crack here. I think I end up pulling a couple screws out and putting them back in, making sure those joints are nice and tight. But I'm also starting to think of, how am I going to put a bottom in this? How am I going to put a back on it? What kind of top am I going to put on it? And I think a good place to start is probably going to be just putting the bottom in it. After all, if I put the bottom in it, I'm starting to form it up into a semi-cube shape. And that means I can move it around a lot easier and work on it. Right now, it's just too hard to move around. I mean, that face frame's all just screwed together and the side panels are on it. I don't want it to flop, and I don't want to tear out screws. I think it's highly unlikely, but I just don't want to run the risk. So I'm starting to plan to go ahead and put small stringers up the sides and across the inside of the face frame so I can start building a plywood bottom for this. Why plywood? Because I don't want to mill a whole bunch of sawmill lumber, and I've got the plywood. So that's a good enough reason for me. I just want to make sure I have a nice, flat, level line all the way around this cabinet and all the way up the sides. And using this square is always a pretty good thing. I check it both directions, of course, too, just to make sure one line isn't wandering off and I didn't know it. So I'll check from the bottom and check from the top and make a combination of the best line between the two of them. But actually, throughout this whole project, everything was pretty darn square. Now these pieces that I have are just cut-offs from other projects, ripping stuff on the table saw and just keeping all of these weird 3/4 by 3/4 or 7/8 by 7/8 or 1 inch by 1 inch sticks. You know, I keep them around for stuff like this. I mean, this is exactly the kind of thing I needed anyway, and I don't have to mill up a totally good board and mess it up just to get these sticks. Now I could do a lot of work to hide that generator noise, and in most of this video I stick the generator around the corner from the shop, so it gets rid of most of that noise. I always deal with the noise of the generator. It just is what it is. I need electricity, it's down here, and now you get the spirit of authenticity, let's call it. It's just like being right here with me and the generator. Well, now it's time to put a bottom in this thing, and it's pretty exciting because it's going to firm this up and make it a lot easier to work with this all the way to the end of the project. Now I've got a bunch of 3/4 inch plywood laying around, and I think that's what I'm going to use. I had picked this up from some guy that was cleaning out his garage, and he had made like some storage boxes or something like that out of this wood and was just throwing it away. I love free lumber, especially large chunks of plywood, because plywood is so dang expensive these days. I made this little crosscut sled, and I really like it. You know, the little jigs that you can make up are so useful, just to slice things off nice and easily and not have to get out other saws. I've found I can do so much on just that darn table saw, and it's great. Well, she stood up. She's looking good. I'm starting to get some ideas now. Look at how great those end panels look, and look at some of the personality in the face frame. Now I used this little chunked up piece of wood because I wanted a little damaged piece of wood on the front, because I think it gives it personality. Not sure what I'm going to do with that yet, but it'll be fine. I know it'll be fine. Time to put that bottom in. And you know, while I'm putting this bottom in, I'd like to ask you if you wouldn't mind liking this video if you're already watching or still watching. I'd appreciate it. And of course, comment on the video. Please discuss anything that you see in here, questions about any of the tools, anything like that. I'd love to talk with you. If you look at any of my other videos, I'm very engaged in the comment section because I just enjoy talking to all of you, and we just have great conversations in the comment section. A lot of what this channel is about is just building a great community of people that like fixing and building things and, you know, not a bunch of know-it-alls. It's amazing how you can share information with each other without being a know-it-all and without trying to one-up each other. Also, I'd love to ask you to subscribe to the channel. You know, it'll let you know when I have new videos coming out, but also just having more subscribers helps my video get more visibility, as does the like button. So, I won't bug you about it a bunch, but I'd sure appreciate it if you'd like, comment, and subscribe. I'd sure appreciate it, and I always appreciate you guys dropping by and watching. I am throwing a ton of nails into this bottom, and it's just for the sake of rigidity, it's for the sake of not putting too much tension on anything and letting it walk out, and just for pinning everything down to the glue. Is it overkill? Absolutely. Is it going to hurt anything? Absolutely not. And plus, this little Senko nailer's been in the box so long, it was just dying to come out and flex. So, that's what I'm letting it do. So because I had to use two smaller pieces of plywood to make that bottom, I need to kind of join them together. So I just cut this little piece of plywood that I'm going to lap together under the bottom where nobody's going to see it. You know, even if I was building this for a customer, I might build it this way. Maybe not. Maybe not. Depending on what I could sell it for, I guess. I mean, if I was to look at Crate and Barrel or something like that, which is probably one of the only places you could get a piece of furniture built like this, golly, who knows what they'd charge? Thousands of dollars? And then at that point, maybe I'd buy a sheet of plywood and do this all out of one piece. But this is for me, and it's not messing with it at all. You know, it's not being lazy, but it is using what's on hand. And I'm fine with that. So a ton of nails, a ton of glue, that's going to be lapped together, and nobody will ever be the wiser. Just you and me. And with that, the bottom's in. Awesome. Now it's nice and stable. And I'm starting to think about an interior shelf. I was going to do a full width shelf, but I got to be honest, I always have something in a 5-gallon bucket, sometimes 2 5-gallon buckets. So I need to leave one of the sides nice and tall, which means I'll probably just put one shelf in one side of this cabinet for things like, you know, weed killer, pest control stuff, little junk of the kids, and I may be able to slide the old leaf blower in there somewhere. And of course, the barbecue grill cover. All these things that just float around the carport. So I think that's going to work. I'm nowhere near ready to install these yet because they need to go on the back of the cabinet, not up against the face frame. But at least I've got those cut and set aside so I don't burn through those pieces of wood later. Well, I finally did it. I had to run to Home Depot and get a sheet of plywood. And why? Well, here's the thing. That back panel is huge. It's probably around 3 feet, a little bigger, by 5 feet wide. And honestly, I don't want to mill up all that wood from the wood mill. It'd be another couple of hours at the planer thinning that stuff down, and for what? It's the side that's up against the wall. Nobody sees it. I'd have to biscuit joint it all together again. Maybe. I don't know. But I want it rigid. And I don't want to make this thing any heavier than it needs to be either. So, 1/2-inch plywood for the back. Nice and light. Nice and tight. Perfect cut on the table saw when I do it. That's what's going to happen. Now, I just need to cut a couple extra stringers out of a couple of the boards that I have that weren't quite straight enough to use for the cabinet. But these stringers will cut just fine. Now you can see the bottom of the cabinet there. I'm just pinning all these little stringers into the bottom of the cabinet. And why is that? Because they're going to catch the plywood sheet that I use for the back. I'm also going to run stringers up the inside back of both of the end panels. And it should be able to catch at least 3 sides. Eventually I'll put the top of this cabinet on, and I'll put another stringer on there and pin that as well to the back panel. And all 4 sides will be structurally helping the cabinet stay rigid because they'll be fastened all the way around with nails and glue. Now, for those of you that don't like too much narration, I'm sorry. And I know this video's over an hour long, which means that's a lot of talking for you and me. But I promise you, it's a lot better than listening to that compressor when I'm outside. Speaking of the compressor, I didn't have anything to cut here for a minute, and I just had to turn it off. It was scrambling my brain. But I'm going to need the nail gun pretty soon, so it's going to turn right back on. Or is it? You know, I started thinking, this plywood, it kind of feels like it wants to delaminate a little. I'm not super impressed with the quality of this plywood. So what I'm going to do is fasten it to the back with screws. After all, it's the back again. Nobody's looking. It's the only place I'm really going to be using screws other than the hardware. But boy, it's a nice good grab, and it keeps it in here nice and solid instead of trying to put a bunch of little brad nails in it that may or may not penetrate some of the layers of the lamination. These screws felt like the right choice, and once I started doing them, I'm pretty happy I did because it made it rock solid. Great fastening, and that back panel is secure. And now, look at this beautiful cabinet that's emerging. I'm so excited. I have never built anything like this of this scale out of this type of wood with such thick face frame. Very exciting. And again, look at some of that sawmill chatter in those end panels. So cool. So now this is where it gets interesting. I had an idea. I thought, why waste all this top space? It's always wasted in a cabinet way up there under the countertop. And I always have little hand tools that I need out in the carport. In fact, I have duplicate tools I just keep outside to have on hand easily. After all, the shop's far away from the house, and I have inside tools and outside tools, and I don't want to mix the two. I thought, what if instead of a solid countertop, I could build a countertop that lifted up, like a tool tray or a toolbox, or just a place to hide things? And so, I've decided to put these stringers in, and I'm going to find something laying around the garage that I can use for a bottom in here. That'll give me a nice big tool tray in the top of this, underneath the workbench, that I can always go to and keep things in. And then I won't be wasting that space. It's very exciting, it's very unique. I've actually never seen anybody do this, although I'm sure people do it. Why wouldn't you do this? Other than the fact you want a fully functional countertop that doesn't move around or hinge or anything like that. But that's exactly what I want now. And I'm so excited about the idea that I've committed to it. So I'm putting stringers around. I'm even marking the back here to know where all of my nail holes go. And getting that pinned up and glued to the back panel. I didn't use screws for this. I just glued it, and I think that's going to be fine. You can thank me in the comments section for that editing work to kill all the dead time between nails. I hope that was as gratifying for you as it was for me. So, when I moved into this house, there was a stack of laminate flooring, and it doesn't go to anything in my house. This isn't used anywhere. I don't know where this came from or what this was for, but I hung on to it thinking I'd use it for something eventually. And you know what? This is the perfect place for it. It doesn't scratch up real easy, it takes a beating, it's thin, and it's strong, and it's water resistant, just in case any water makes its way down through this hinged top that I'm going to put on it, and won't totally rot out. So I think it's perfect, and I cut up all these pieces to fit in there like a tray. I'm really excited about this. I hope you are as excited as I am, because really, I was just head over heels about how cool this was going to turn out. I figured now that I had the back panel in, I was going to go ahead and just put this little shelf together because I could actually pin it to the back and get it pinned through the bottom. Now, of course I have to cut this corner out to accommodate the stringer, and I'm just going to do that real quick. But what I want to say is, this may not be the shelf configuration you want. It wasn't the shelf configuration I wanted, it's just the shelf configuration that works for the application I'm using it for. In a perfect world where this was being used somewhere else, where I didn't need to put big things in it like my kindling splitter in the off season or just buckets of stuff, I'd have probably put a full shelf all the way across this, because that's much more useful storage to me. If I was making something like this to list for sale or take to a market or just making for a client, well, I'd probably throw a straight shelf in it. But honestly, I'd put whatever shelf in it the customer needed. But for this, I'm the customer, and it's what I need. So, as much as I dislike the shelf configuration aesthetically, I know that I'll like it for what I'm using it for, and that's really what matters. Now, it's time to build this tray. Can you hear the difference when I put the generator on the other side of the building? While I have this laying on its back, of course I nailed in the bottom of that shelf leg. And, of course, the tray is now a tray. This is all coming together. But this is a problem. So I made a mistake. I was going to use these pieces of poplar for a top, and I milled them a little thicker. Now, I joined them all from the back and didn't realize what I was doing. They are nice and flush on the inside, but on the outside, they're raised by somewhere between a 1/16 and an 1/8 of an inch. I'll worry about that a little more. I'll probably use this hand planer and get real dangerous. But for now, I want to shave that top edge down and make sure that lid's going to shut nice and clean once I go ahead and put a lid on it. Now I'm trying to use materials on hand. I'm thinking about what can I do. I was going to do a poplar top, but then I thought something thicker, something more durable, and something with a wider lid. Something that hinges up like that. And it ended up being more yellow pine, which I had, and that's fine by me. But that means the old planer is coming out again. carport somewhat. I'm going to go ahead and cut these down now to the width that I need, or the length, or whatever. I'm going to start putting these together. Once I get them cut to length, I'm going to take a second one in the back and go ahead and rip it down on the table saw. And I think what I'm going to go ahead and do here is give it some backsplash so when I'm working on it, stuff doesn't fall off the back of it and get stuck between it and a wall in my carport outside. So I'm going to use this rip, and whatever's left is going to become the backsplash. That's totally fine by me. I'm going to just throw some clamps on it, throw a little glue on it, and I'm going to screw this because I really want it firmly attached. Just in case it gets pushed on or I need to clamp something to it or whatever, I really want to make it firm. So I go ahead and let the kids hold on to it while I drive some screws in. As you can see, I just added that fourth stringer to the back panel. Right there on the back, just out of scraps that I had available, instead of cutting up another board. That's going to give me two things. One, it of course secures the back panel to the top, which makes it an incredibly rigid box now. But it also gives me some meat to fasten this top down into. And for that, I pull out my nice rigid 15 gauge nailer, which is a pretty big brag nail, and I'm pretty happy to have that little gun. I got that fairly recently for some closets I need to finish. Now, I don't want a ton of nail holes in the top of this, but I've got to get it fastened down, so this was the best way. I didn't want to use screws, and it worked out great. I mean, you can lift the whole cabinet by just this little portion, so despite the cabinet in the end weighing nearly, golly, it's got to be 200 pounds. It's a solid cabinet, a solid piece of outdoor furniture that's not going to blow over and not going to get beat up anytime soon. But it can lift from just that back portion using stronger fasteners and glue. Now I'm just going to use some boring old 6-screw hinges. I'm kind of going for a farm style look, a little more utilitarian. You know, I've used fancy screws and fancy hinges on stuff over the years, and after a while, they just end up looking silly. So I didn't want to do that. I mean, they work in the right application, but for this, it's outdoor, it's utilitarian, and that's what I want it to look like. Plus, I actually want it to hold up long term. So this type of hinge works great for me, and I actually think it looks wonderful. Now, a lot of people would say you could put a piano hinge in here, or you could at least hide the hinges and cut some tiny little mortises in. But I don't care. I actually like seeing the hinges, and I'm starting to think I'm going to do that to the doors too. I was originally going to do mortised hinges on the doors if I did doors, and I don't know. I just don't like the idea. I was also trying to think of what kind of hardware can I do for the cabinetry doors, and I was thinking magnets, I was thinking some other things, but at the end of the day, I figured they should just lock nice and tight. So I'll show you what I came up with for those, but not quite yet. Well, look at that top. That is super cool. I feel great about that. And like I said, we're just making this up as we go. Look at that great tool tray. Great place to stash some stuff up in the carport. I love it. I'm really excited about this. I've never seen anybody do it. And like I've said, somebody's probably done this. A lot of people have probably done it. I've never seen it. And that's so fun when you don't plan too far ahead and you can come up with stuff out of your head. That is really the joy of building things with wood, is just getting to be creative with something that really you can build something substantially out of with pretty basic tools. Well, I'm dreading the doors. I really am. I hate building doors. And I don't have a router table or anything, so I'm not going to do like a inset frame or anything. I figure I'm going to still make this somewhat simple and farm style, even though it's built far better than some junky piece of quickly thrown together workshop farm furniture. I should have shown you a shot of the floor here, but what I'm showing you is what I have left of lumber to work with. I wasn't going to make doors originally, but now I am, and I don't have enough material of anything to make doors. So very quickly clean up the floor and just some of the scraps that are around and start drying out this burn barrel that's been soaked by tons of rainfall. I'm going to have a lot of scraps like this to burn. Now, I've mentioned to you guys in other videos that I have this disability and it causes a lot of chronic pain. And all this time that you see me on my feet, it may look like I've been out here forever, but what I'm filming right now is possibly the 10th, 11th, 12th, 15th day. I lost track at this point. But I just have to work a tiny bit at a time and stop when I have to stop. And that's all I can do. And this is as physically active as I've been able to be in a long, long time. And so, you know, I'd like to give a word of encouragement to anybody that's disabled or dealing with getting older and having a bad back, or if you have fibromyalgia, or like me, it's fibromyalgia and constant carpal tunnel and RSV, which is a nerve disorder. And I'm going to tell you that sometimes you have to push through the pain, because just laying in bed, you're going to be in pain too. You might as well make it worth it and not just live there and watch TV all day. So I encourage you, if you can, get a little hobby, anything you can do, even if it hurts your hands, anything else. Do something to get your circulation going. Do something to let your mind create. And it is what it is, you know. Anyway, silly little rant. You saw me get out the biscuit joiner here. We're going to make some doors out of more of this yellow pine. I went to the sawmill, and that's all I could do in that in-between day. Went and picked up 4 boards from just down the street, brought them home, unloaded them, and that's all I could do. Next day, here we are. I'm getting out the biscuit joiner. And as you can see, I'm double biscuiting. I'm going to biscuit one side, then flip the board over and biscuit it again, because I don't want these doors to crackle and fall apart or split or spread or warp in any way at the joints. So, double biscuit. Never done that before, but why not? Couldn't hurt. More joining points. And these doors turned out nice and flat, which is awesome. Now look at all that glue. That's a problem, and I didn't wipe that off good enough. And you're really gonna see that I didn't wipe it off good enough when we get to staining. So, oh boy, really should have wiped that off better. I wonder why I struggled so hard at the staining stage with these specific parts. But, oh well, can't redo it now. Just have to deal with it. I would encourage wiping it down with a little bit of water on a rag. I've got those both clamped up again. Again, those Harbor Freight bar clamps are great. 60-inch, just enough to grab up a 5-foot something or other. Nice and affordable. I like that. Really happy to have them and not have a bunch of big, heavy bar clamps, because I just don't need them. At least I don't need them yet. Now, I've got a big project that I want to do, but I physically just can't even imagine doing it, even a little at a time. But at some point, I'd like to build a nice, big, long 14-foot credenza cabinet for a wall across my basement where the TV and the video game systems and all the DVDs and all the other junk goes. But not right now. And I don't need the clamps for them right now. I just need these clamps for these little projects. Now there's that Gorilla wood glue. Little lumpy, little weird, but it overall worked pretty great. So the last thing I got to do is check if these openings are square, and they're pretty darn square. There's no wobble in the speed square. So what I'm going to do is measure these up and get my width, and what I'm going to do is inset these cabinets so the whole front is flat instead of the doors standing out. I think it'll be a cool look, and as I'm starting to think about hardware, I think it's going to work right. I want to use the same hinges I used for the hinged top as I do on the doors, so they need to be flush. So I'm going to cut it down to a width that's roughly a little more than a 1/4 inch, which means I'll get a little more than an 1/8 inch gap on each side of the door inside of that cutout. Same with the height, about a little more than a 1/4 inch so I can get that gap. And I want to leave a healthy gap because it's outside, we live in Tennessee, the humidity can go up or down, and that door and the face frame could swell and bind up. So I just don't want to give it too much of a chance to ever bind or sag a little when it settles in. So leave some room. Always leave some room when you're insetting stuff like that. Nice relief will help you out a lot. Remember that problem I mentioned before about this wood here that was a little thicker? Well, I got to take that down, and I ain't going to do it sanding, but it's got to be flatter for the doors. So out comes the hand planer again. And I'm just going to mow off some material here. It doesn't have to be perfect because I'll still be sanding at some point. But I need to take down over 1/8 of an inch of meat here just to get it to match the legs on the front. And I was kind of scared because I was afraid that I would mow this planer through those uprights and just leave some trashed out marks and peel out a lot of grain. But I didn't. I took it easy, got it down to a safe spot, and when it looked like we were getting dangerous, we made one more pass and called it good. So now a ton of sanding. Tons and tons and tons of sanding. And I use this little Harbor Freight sander, which works excellent. Some of these Bauer tools are really good. I've had a Bosch sander. I've had a DeWalt sander. I had a Porter Cable sander back in the day at one point. And they're all fine. But I got to say, this thing works just as good as any of the other ones I've had. The random orbit on it was excellent. And so there it is. Now, the glue lines. I'm really trying to get as much of the glue off as I can. And the other problem, all these spots that I marked for the biscuit joining alignment, well, as you see, pencil doesn't erase too great. That graphite really gets in there. And so you got to sand, baby. You got to sand, sand, sand. And all those marks are on there. Maybe I got a little aggressive, but I also didn't make any mistakes. So that's fine. A little bit of sanding with probably some 80 grit here. Maybe 120. I don't know. I don't remember what I used, but I don't like to go too abrasive. But it wouldn't hurt here too bad. So I'm pretty sure this was an 80. I'm just going to go across the whole thing and sand it down until it's got some of the personality I want. Moving up then to a 120 grit and giving a little roundness to the edges, but still trying to keep this extremely square. Now here's that damaged piece that I said I added to the front for personality, and I just really don't have any plan for it except it's gonna look like a piece of weathered wood. So I sanded that area out a little, and I'll hit that with some filler at some point, and whatever it ends up looking like will be fine with me. Nobody else will really notice it except for somebody that's really checking out the personality of this cabinet. But I'll know it's there, and I won't be unhappy with it. I'll get it figured out. A lot more sanding. Whole lot more sanding. And that's okay. We like sanding. We like the dust in the air in our eyes. We like everything that we just cleaned covered in a fine powder like we were in a baker's shop. It's fine. Well, the dust is pretty out of control down here, and I decided on this day to go straight to blowing off some dust, but of course I realized I needed to sand a little more, so I got to that, and as soon as I was satisfied with that, then I got back to a little more cleaning up of the dust. And this is all I did this day again. Once again, people with disabilities and chronic pain, don't push yourself. Getting a little done is still getting something done, and that's okay. Then, of course, the only other thing I did was cleaned up this table and my other workbench because I was running out of spaces just to put things, and some of these tools I wasn't going to use anymore. I'm a firm believer in cleaning as you go. That way you're always working a semi-clean workspace, and you're always being able to find your little tools and knickknacks you need to work with. So, tucking things away, clearing some floor space, and making the space available to yourself is great. You're also being kind to your future self, which I'm really learning as I get older is quite important. It rained again, so the old burn barrel is wet again. So a little gasoline. Why not? Maybe a little aggressive there. One of these days, I'll make a short video that shows the difference between flammable and combustible. I wish I had known the difference when I was a little younger, and, well, you know, sometimes you play with gasoline and end up a little surprised at how good it works or how bad it works for what you're trying to do. So now I'm playing with scrap wood between the poplar and this yellow pine, trying to figure out which finish I'm going to go with. The only reason I tried the Danish oil is because it can really cause some good sealing and some good protection, but it ain't working. So I'm going to pre-stain this yellow pine. Don't need to do it to the poplar, but yellow pine, any pine, is just not going to take stain well. A lot of these semi-resiny or sappy softwoods just won't. But with that pre-treatment, it really just opens up the pores and the grains in those woods and lets it take a nice finish. And you can see I'm getting pretty similar shades between the poplar and the pine. This is definitely the color I'm going to finish with. And I'll go with a wipe-on polyurethane for the finish. Well, kids, it's time to fill these cracks and all these little personality spots that I left. And what I'm going to use is actually what has turned out to be one of my favorite fillers over the year. It's Elmer's wood filler. I've used Minwax over and over again and tried to convince myself I love so many Minwax products. This is going to be great, and I just don't like it. It gets so oily, especially on the softer woods, that it almost stains and discolors my finishing. So I really like the Elmer's wood filler. It goes on super easy. It dries really great. It sands super easy, and it stains up very nicely. So nice application of that anywhere that I can use it, and we'll see what happens. All I did this day was just apply a little bit of sealer and had to call it a day. And then the next day, I'll end up coming back and sanding that when it's dry. And it did dry. It dried great. Really, really great. As I said it would. As Elmer's claims it would. Everybody's out there trying to use all this fancy tight bond and all these other brands that have come out over the last few years, and scientifically, chemically, they all have their purpose, and I'm not going to say one's better than the other, but don't underestimate an old glue and filler brand like Elmer's, because the product seems to always work. You know, you can even find glue in a bottle that looks like the school glue, except it's called Glue All, good old Elmer's Glue All, and it makes excellent wood glue, and it sands off great as well. So, shout out to Elmer's, still doing great things when a lot of companies have reduced the quality of their product and increased the price, just trying to figure out what that minimum viable product is that you can get by selling to somebody. I haven't seen Elmer's do that. Elmer's products are still very high quality, and I'm very happy to see a brand like that continuing to stand the test of time. Now there's that little rough spot. Filled up, sanded out. Look how cool that looks. And that stain's going to take a nice dark chunk of that filler and just make it pop out there a little bit. So that'll be cool. And of course, you can see some glue drips there, right? See them dripping up because the board was facing the other way? I got to get these sanded off. I just can't sand them enough, and I can't express to you enough what I forgot to do at this point, and I don't know why. Probably just fighting through the pain and losing track of the details, which happens. Slow down, take your time, clean up that mess, and wipe that glue off as much as you can, because boy oh boy, especially on these doors, I really had a problem cleaning up the glue, and I ended up doing some of the staining where I would stain, and the pre-treatment wouldn't even soak in because it was gluey. So pre-treat, then stain, and these spots would not stain, and I'd have to go back and sand down a big chunk of the door again, past the stain of course, and get down past that glue and restain. So it stinks redoing your work over and over again. Just get all that glue off in the sanding process. I was probably going a little too soft on these doors. I had that foam sanding pad on there and probably should have pulled it out and gone straight to the hard base on the sander. And I should have used the plug-in sander, but I didn't want to turn on the generator again. So this little battery sander wasn't pulling its weight for this job. Just think about what you're doing. But remember, if you're going to stain something, boy, you better get all that visible glue off because it ain't gonna stain and you will see it. You know, I'm not as strong as I used to be after spending about a year in bed and 3 years in a wheelchair. Just getting back to the point where I can get out and do stuff a little has been really great, but this cabinet's heavy. Even tipping it up's heavy. Sometimes I would just have to wait until somebody dropped by and asked them to help tip it up. Some days that's all I did was tip it up. But it's coming together, and boy is it heavy, and boy is it big. Real big. And nice and tall for me. Being somewhere between 6'2" and 6'3" tall, a standard 36-inch cabinet, it's just too short for me. I'm always bending over. It hurts my shoulders, it hurts my neck, it hurts my back. And so I think I made this thing close to 40 inches tall, which is awesome. But it's more wood, it's more weight. And now, just trying to get the last of the dust off of it and wipe it all down with some tack cloth so I can do this pre-stain. Especially on the pine portions, I'm not super worried about the poplar. In fact, I'm not worried about the poplar at all. That poplar will take just about any stain with about zero issues. But the pre-staining on the pine has to happen. And this thing's way up in the air. I have it up on that about 30-inch set of sawhorses with that plywood tabletop I made. And then this is another 40 inches, so it is way, way, way up there. And I ended up having to stand on a chair because I just didn't have the strength to lay the cabinet down again. Well, that pre-stain dried up, and here we are finally with this beautiful Minwax stain of what color? I can't remember. Maybe a walnut type stain. I can't remember. Maybe I'll show the can at some point, but maybe I won't. Look at how quick that poplar takes it. It just sucks it right in. It's so beautiful, and look at all that personality. This is why I love working with poplar. You just get this beautiful thing out of it. I don't know. The grain is so interesting. It's got so much personality. It's just wild, but it's beautiful as well. It can be sophisticated. It can be woodsy. It can have some cool personality like walnut, like I've said. I mean, it's just neat. I love working with poplar, and I'm so glad that I built this out of poplar, even though the time was so consuming. To build these end panels out of poplar instead of just some plywood, again, beautiful. And look at how that sawmill chatter comes out with the stain. Also, look at how that glue that I didn't quite clean up came out with the stain. Pretty heartbreaking. I don't think anybody else would care, but I'm going to see it every time. So I'll end up going back and sanding that. But for now, I need to get a full coat of stain on this while it's wet. And it's really just coming out beautiful. Look how those knots pop. Look how the grains pop. Look how the coloration pops. Super awesome. Now these yellow pine doors, that pre-treatment, wonderful. Really takes the stain well. But as I mentioned before in the video, those glue lines at the joints, look at them. You can see it. It didn't take the pre-stain. It didn't take the stain. And that's a real problem. So I'll stain the fronts and the backs real quick, just to get a coat on it. But boy, oh boy, you're going to see where those glue lines come out. And now I want to show you, I'm trying to restain it again. Some of these spots I tried to put stain on 3 times just to show you what happens. It's still not great. And that's going to require some sanding. Because, I mean, why waste the time, right? Why waste the time on all this work to have some yucky glue streaks there? So I'll sand that out, maybe not on camera, and reapply some stain, and it'll look great. Now, while I'm at it, I might as well stain everything because I want to throw a little bit of urethane on everything. My main reason is carpenter bees. Those little guys like to show up on any untreated wood and just start burrowing pinky finger-sized holes in everything. And as much as I love that, I'm going to spare this piece of furniture that problem. So give it a quick stain up inside. Doesn't have to be perfect, but let's bring the tone down to match. And look how pretty that is. I'm so excited. What a beautiful thing. I mean, I could have built this out of plywood, like I'd said. It's just a storage box for the patio. But now, it can serve many purposes. Maybe someday we'll move to a home that has a simpler floor plan, which makes it easier for me instead of this one with stairs and with hills all around. Something flatter. Well, this piece of furniture can be used for all sorts of stuff. In fact, it's good enough it could even be used indoors in an entryway or something like that, depending on what the style of the house is. It could be used as a side-serving buffet. It can be used for all sorts of stuff. I love this piece of furniture. I'm excited about it, and I'd like to build a couple more someday and gift them to somebody, or maybe even sell them. But for now, I don't have it in me. And even at the point I got to editing this video, editing a video like this shouldn't take me more than a day. And it took me in total around 8 or 9 days just because I had to do it in little tiny stages. Well, back to the finish. Wipe on polyurethane. I love this stuff, but you really want to get the rag wet. You're going to wipe it on, and you're going to do a light sanding between coats with about a 400 grit sandpaper. Wipe the whole thing down with a tack cloth again, and put another coat on. On this cabinet, I did about 3 coats, and I'm going to apply probably 2 more coats to the top of it once I get it up outside and let it adjust to whatever humidity level it's going to deal with. But it really brings that nice satin shine without being heavily glossy. And of course, this protectant is enough to deter the carpenter bees, which overjoys me. I don't like high glossy furniture anyway. This satin finish is just enough that there's no glare on it, but it still helps that finish pop. And I love it so much. And wipe-on polyurethane really is easy to do. I love it so much as well. Great product. And as I apply the rest of this wipe-on poly, you can watch my camera lens defrost, or whatever you want to call it, defog, as it was resting at just about the dew point and fogged up while I was filming, and I didn't notice. But look how good that's starting to look with finisher on it. Boy, oh boy. Now this is a stinker. I hate finishing plywood, but I just wanted to seal it up as well on the back and get it dark. But that wipe-on poly is not fun on plywood. I should have probably just bought some spray cans of poly and done it that way. Oh well, no big deal. It's done. Except for I need to do the inside as well, which I really didn't want to do. But again, the carpenter bees, and just the durability of it, giving it a chance with the moisture to just block a little of it. Finally, I'm to the top. Get a couple coats on that. And I'll do a couple more coats when it's found its final resting place. Maybe a couple of weeks after this has dried out completely and settled. Now, you see that glue line still, and I've done it off camera. I went back and sanded and reapplied some stain. It's not completely perfect, but it's pretty good. The last thing I did was I applied 3 separate coats of the wipe-on poly to the end grains of the feet. After all, this is going to probably be in direct contact with cement, and I may still add some small rubber pads to the bottom of this to keep it elevated from sucking up and wicking that water out of the concrete, especially if it rains and water gets in the carport. But to give it a fair shot, I wanted to seal up those end grains with this polyurethane, and I let it soak up those 3 coats, and it seems to have helped a lot. Now, I wanted to show you this spot. This is really silly. I never got glue here, ever. I don't know if this is from sap dripping down between boards at the lumber mill and just getting on this wood, but I sanded it, and I pre-treated it, and it turned out this way. And as you see, I just sanded it again and pre-treated it this way. And although it's much better looking, it isn't going to take any more than that without me taking the whole thing apart. And I don't know, it's been through the planer and everything. I mean, I don't know what's going on with it. So a little bit of personality there. I wasn't too worried about it. It's going to go outside and get beat up immediately. I mean, I'm really going to use this top outside. It's going to get dirt on it. It's going to have tools banging on it. It's going to get scraped, and I'll end up restaining it at some point anyway. So I'm not going to let that get me down. And these doors as well, that's about as good as I'm going to get them, honestly. How exciting. If I had a wider planer, I'd probably run these entire panels through, but they're just a little too big for that. And I figure, again, at some point when I try to work on that top, maybe I'll take these doors and go ahead and sand them completely down again with a very rough grit and go ahead and reapply the stain again. I don't know, but for now it's fine. And I'm telling you, by the time I get it up in the carport and you step away from it and see the whole thing in perspective, you don't notice it as much. But I'm not happy with it. I will admit to that. I'm not super happy about it. Although now that I've had it installed where it belongs, I don't even notice it anymore. I don't even see it. All I see is a big, beautiful cabinet. And so that's a problem for another day. Right now, I'm just installing this hardware. Same hinges as the top. And what I decided is, when somebody slams these big heavy doors, I just want it to shut. I don't want a hook and a peg. I don't want some little twisty doodad. I just want it to shut. And so I went with these fence latch thingies. You know, it seemed a little utilitarian, and I thought it would ugly up the furniture. But like I said, I wanted it to be a little farmhouse style, and I wanted it to be utilitarian. And in the end, they look great, they work great, and they're absolutely perfect. And I can put poison in there and throw a padlock on it, which is a great spot to store it without the kids getting into it. So I think it's a win. And look at how great it looks. Kind of reminds me of an old ice box or ice chest like you would see. I think it's great. So finally, after a month of working on it, maybe even a little more, I get to move it up to its final resting place. at least for the foreseeable future. I can start tucking away some of the clutter from the carport in this toolbox. I can put some of the fertilizers and poisons and start finding the rest, and of course the bucket storage down there. I'm pretty darn happy with it. It looks great. It matches the carport really well. In fact, it almost looks a little too nice. But I'm really excited about enjoying this for years to come and having a little workbench out there for when we need to pot plants or just work on small projects and have a surface, or a place to serve food outside if we're barbecuing. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you being here. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and check out some of my other episodes. Hopefully I'll see you soon again. God bless. Have a great day.